Hello, I'm Juan Camilo Estrada, and welcome to Epicentro. This program will be dedicated to the operation and importance of a production nursery. Today we will have Juan David Fernandez, agronomist, and Juan Pablo Gonzalez, forestry engineer, and of course Gonzalo Posada, gardener. First we'll listen to Juan David and Juan Pablo, who will talk about the process of introducing a seed and the purpose of a nursery. When a new species arrives to the living collection, the species arrives to the nursery either from seed or a seedling that has to be taken to grow to a whole process so that it develops and then enters the bio collection. So there it is, like a cradle room, where the plant or the seeds are given all the conditions to develop, conditions of light, water, nutrients, among others. When the plant grows and is ready to establish itself in the collection, it is necessary to have special conditions to know what is the climate where it grows naturally. What are the light conditions that the plant must have? That is, if it is a shade plant or a plant with full sun exposure, if it is a plant that can withstand drought, or if it requires more humidity. All this we have to take into account to know how we are going to plant it and the place where we are going to plant it in the collection. We are in the production nursery of the Botanical Garden of Medellín. In this nursery, we can find today approximately 350 different species of plants available for the community for sale, and additionally, in our germinators, we have approximately 300 additional species in a process of germination to then offer them to the community and to the botanical garden itself. We have Amazonian plants, plants from the eastern plains, plants from the Andean and Caribbean regions, and plants from our Choco. We have endemic plants, and we produce endemic plants. That is to say, plants that only grow in Colombia. We have a large number of species that are in some degree of threat or risk of extinction. So, if we try to focus on plant species that are native to our territory and that are of interest for some of these reasons. We also produce some species of ferns, epiphytic plants, that is, plants that grow on trees. We have some very special groups of plants that are very typical of Colombia, such as the zamias, which is a very ancient group of plants in the history of our planet and that have, let's say, great restrictions for their use and commercialization, so here we propagate them to feed the living collections of the Botanical Garden. Thank you very much to Juan David, to Juan Pablo for this information that you have just given us. There is a very important place to help control the temperature, climate, or humidity in plants called greenhouse. Then Juan Pablo explains how this helps the propagation of species. Let's say that in general, the nurseries, and especially this one, the Botanical Garden, has several associated infrastructures. This place where we are, let's say that it is the heart of the nursery because it is a municipal greenhouse where most of the plants germinate. Then, here we control the precipitation conditions. That is, here we control the amount of water that will fall on these germinators. After some time, after germination, we go to a process of what we call the repeak, which is a moment in which we take them out of the germinators of the sand and we take them to larger containers, bags or pots, so that they grow enough. The distribution has also been given according to the material that has been arriving. So we have a sector of bromeliads. We have a sector for cacti. We have a sector for anthuriums. But well, here we have material for many parts. We have palms, we have some creepers, all germinating. So, this place is like the heart. The main greenhouse, besides that, a nursery has other associated infrastructures. It has some structures, or patios, where we can carry out the whole process associated with the substrates. That is where we sift the substrate, where we mix them, we leave them ready for the bagging process. That is the whole process in which we collect the substrate and take it to some bags to transplant all this material, and that is germinating here. Having this type of infrastructure in a nursery is very important. First, because it allows us to control the humidity and temperature conditions required by the different plants. This is a place where we can also be aware of the entry of pests, diseases. The fact of having a space like this allows us to have the conditions to work with the seeds, to carry out all the associated procedures, the qualification. We can work with this type of chemical elements, so having this type of conditions is very important. Here we also measure the seeds, so we take some important information that is not known about many species, such as their size, their weight, and that basic information that we should have about all the plant. In greenhouses, there are different types of seeds, and depending on their species, they require special care. Let's know some of them. In general, most seeds, for example, simply require a previous hydration that activates a whole metabolic pathway, which is responsible for giving the seeds the seed cells, the signal to begin to germinate, to start producing root cells and cells of the primordial leaves. On the contrary, there are many seeds that require, for example, seeds that have very hard heads or coatings, require, or it is important to make them processes prior to hydration. To achieve a faster germination or a higher percentage, for example, the piñón de oreja is a relatively hard seed. Its germination can be 2 or 3 times faster and in a higher proportion. So these seeds were sanded on some of their sides, and this allows a faster hydration and a faster germination. Here we have other seeds that we were not scarified, and we have found that the germination of these seeds is more delayed, slower, and in lower proportions. There are some seeds in which we use hormonal products. We submerge them in some hormones associated with germination in such a way as to promote the germination. We do this for very special plant species or those that are at risk of extinction. Ferns, as I was telling you just now, do not bring seeds, specifically seeds, but ferns are propagated by spores. Spores are tiny structures. Then their germination begins with seedlings. That can measure less than a millimeter. In this type of media, they remain with a high percentage of humidity all the time that promotes the germination of these spores. After the spores germinate and have a certain size, we take them to an intermediate container that is no longer completely covered, but they already have an exchange of gases. We make some breaks here, which allows us a greater exchange of gases. And here in this type of environment, the ferns reach a little bit bigger sizes and require special care. It is not the same as germinating a tree seed or like the ones I was showing you just now, which only require hydration. Seeds have the function of multiplying and preserving the species to which they belong. That is why it is important to take care of them in greenhouses. After the break, we'll learn about seed reproduction. When we returned to Epicentro, they knew that the germination of the seeds depends on their size. Juan Pablo Gonzalez, forestry engineer, tells us what it is all about. From the time we bring the seeds until the tree is ready for sale or for propagation, it is very variable. So for example, in this case, I present you a little tree, colloquially known as El Piñón de Oreja, a species of the Fabaceae family of the legumes called Enterolobium. Cyclocarpum whose germination here with what we have seen is very fast. After the seeds reach the sand, more or less after a week, the seeds have finished their germination. For example, here we have seeds about 15 days after having thrown them. Look at the size they have, close to 20 centimeters. So let's say that this is a species that can be produced very fast and that reaches sizes of less than 2-3 months. We can have a tree ready to go to the field. On the contrary, there are many other species that germination is very slow or their seeds are tiny. Then, the time they take to grow is much longer. For example, the seeds of piñón de oreja are relatively large seeds. They are seeds that bring within themselves a fairly large energy reserve that allows the seeds to germinate and produce leaves, reach relatively large sizes quickly. But, on the contrary, there are seeds of very small sizes of less than a millimeter that bring very little energy reserves and therefore germinate very small, and their growth process takes longer. This is also the case of palms. Palms in general are plants with very hard seeds, and their germination process can take years even. From the moment we receive palm seeds until we can offer them to the public, it can take 1 or 2 years, even 3 years. In the production nursery, they work with conservation and propagation projects of different species that are endangered. Currently, the Botanical Garden Nursery has several projects with EPM. Let's learn more about them. Since last year, since 2022, the Botanical Garden has been developing a project with EPM in the area of influence of the Ituango hydroelectric plant, which is a project that has to do with the study of some species of trees and very rare plants in the region, which EPM has as the interest is knowing how is their phenology, that is, how is their reproductive cycle, in which months they flower, in which these seasons they produce fruit, and associated to this project. We want to develop some protocols to try to understand what is the way to produce and propagate those species of plants that are so special. For example, here we are preparing some seeds. We are hydrating them as part of their initial treatment before taking them to the air. We are hydrating them as part of their initial treatment before taking them to the arena. These are the seeds of a tree that in the city is known as azuceno. It is also a tree that comes from the area of influence of Ituango, from the Rubiaceae family, the same family as coffee, but this is a native tree. Its seeds are very beautiful. They have a very special color, and it is also a tree of interest for EPM in this whole procedure of the study of the trees. Now, let us see what processes are carried out with some Ituango seeds before their germination. For example, did you know that no matter how small the seed is, it is also measured? In this case, we have the seeds of a species of a tree that in the city they call Varasanta or Gallinaceae, a tree of the Triplaris genus of the Polynaceae family, which is a very common tree in the area of influence of Ituango, and that brings salty seeds that are dispersed through the air. Then, the first task here is to remove those wings, leaving them naked to subsequently perform the whole process of germination. For example, here I can show you another very common species in Hydrotuango, a species of the genus Jacaranda, which here in the city is called Walande, a tree that blooms purple. In fact, at this time is flowering, and also EPM is interested in developing a protocol for germination and propagation. Here, after having the seeds naked, ready for germination, we separate them in equal numbers. We weigh them, we measure their dimensions, and we proceed to make these germination tests with the same number of seeds for each treatment or for each form of germination that we are going to test. We have been learning about the great diversity of plants, whose functions contribute to the balance of the ecosystem, keeping the air and water clean. After the break, we are going to know what are the functions performed by gardeners in nurseries. The maintenance of nurseries requires the work of gardeners who are dedicated to the care of plants such as flowers, shrubs, trees, and lawns. In nurseries, they must be constantly aware of all the species of plants that enter. Gonzalo Posado, a gardener at the Botanical Garden here in the city of Medellín, tells us about the work they do on a daily basis. Well, let's say that working with gardens is delicate and you must have a minimum of knowledge, preferably people from the countryside. Why? Because people from the countryside come with a capacity, let's say, of work and knowledge. So the tools that are used here are machete, hoe, bar. That is why it is more difficult for people from the city to work, and there are many people who arrive with a desire to work. So the obligation of one who has been here for a long time is to give them an induction and help them to succeed. What you don't like, you shouldn't do. Let's say the environment is your responsibility and it is more beautiful than planting a tree and watching it grow. In my case, it is wonderful. You see, for example, a beautiful garden in the city and you say, I participated in that planting. It is very rich. I even spent 7 continuous years with the environmental project, planting trees on all the slopes. We were in charge of all the hills, ravines, impure reforestation, planting young trees, and doing maintenance. Gonzalo taught us about his daily chores, including his participation in planting and maintenance of the city's flowers. Air pollution is one of the most serious environmental problems for our health. Both trees and shrubs can achieve a decrease of up to 2% of ozone. We organize the material. We have to sweep the hard floor, fill the bags, transplant the material. When I say material, I mean the trees. They come in a process. The process is from the nursery. In the nursery is a seedling. From there, it reproduces and begins the process of bagging. The most normal thing is that it arrives in a coffee bag. From there, when it has an indicated size, then it goes to a 10x16 bag. From there, it returns and another transplant of 13x16 is made. Or in that case, if the tree is very tall, the tree is fattened at once. The fattening is like the last step that the tree takes, and from the fattening, the tree goes directly to the field. We even come from the SIF project, which is the project that performs maintenance throughout the city. Here we do gardening work, but more than anything else, we do planting. Every day, we are doing some errors that are these. This is called error. We are very involved with this issue. To organize a nursery, we could say that the weeds are competition for the tree. So if you do not remove them, what the weeds do is to absorb all the nutrients that you give to the tree. For that reason, the tree will not go forward. It will not progress. Because if you leave the weeds at the end, the tree disappears. Because if you leave the weeds at the end, the trees disappears. That is why normally every month we do this work to clean the whole nursery, because if you let a lot of weeds take advantage, it is very bad, because then the weeds grow a lot, and sometimes by pulling the weeds, they pull the tree out. Gonzalo's passion for his work in the field is really contagious. At the end of the day, this reflects the great work he's done as a gardener. And now it's time to review the photographs you share with us in our Closer to the Field section. Britt Gomez, faithful viewer of our program, shares with us this beautiful photograph with that spectacular sky of a sunset from her farm. Orlando Giraldo from Rio Frio in Valle del Cauca shares with us this picture of what seems to be an ear of corn recently devoured by some bird. Camilo Esquera Sanchez from Bogota shares with us this beautiful sunset. See how magnificent and beautiful this sunset is in the capital. Maria Iris Peña Mota from Pipao, Cundinamarca, another faithful viewer of our program. By the way, thank you very much for sharing with us this beautiful photograph of these spectacular red flowers. And we finish with Elena Oliveras, who sends us this photograph from a rose crop she has at her home. And thank you very much for participating in the section closer to the field TV. Always remember that you can send any photograph or video that brings you closer to the field to our email epicentrotvagro@gmail.com, or also post them on our social networks with the hashtag Más Cerca del Campo TV. And so we end this new installment of Epicenter. Thank you for joining us and for remaining active. Remember to write to us, share your comments, your videos, and everything you want with the TV Agro channel. Remember that this program can also be seen on our YouTube channel. I'm Juan Camilo Estrada, and see you next time.